A man buried his first wife on a Friday. By Sunday, he was already writing a list of qualities he wanted in the next one. No grief, no guilt, no shame, just a list. And at the very top, in bold, underlined, circled twice, was one word: quiet. He wanted a quiet wife. A woman who would cook without complaining, clean without asking, suffer without speaking, and smile through all of it like the house was a paradise, and she was lucky to breathe inside it. Like she had no opinions, no pain, no self-worth protecting. He found her, and that was the biggest mistake of his life. Here is what nobody in that village told the new bride. The first wife did not die from sickness or bad luck, or because God called her home early. She died because she was silent, and the man she married knew exactly how to use that silence against her. He sharpened it into a tool. He turned her patience into permission. He mistook her endurance for consent. The whole village knew, her parents knew, the neighbors knew, the church members knew, the market women knew, and every single one of them looked the other way because the man had money. And in many communities, money has always been louder than a woman's cry. Money makes community leaders nod. Money makes pastors smile warmly on Sunday mornings. Money makes inconvenient truths very easy to overlook. Does that sound familiar? Because today, we are going to talk about what happens when a man like that meets a woman who refuses to be silent. A woman who found a dead wife's diary and used every single word in it as a weapon. Not a weapon of destruction, a weapon of truth. And truth, when it finally speaks in a room full of lies, does not whisper, it shakes the walls. Stay right here because this story is going to move you. Chief Ez Okafor was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately made it smaller. Not because of his size, though he was tall and broad. It was his presence, the ego entering before the man, the way his eyes swept every space like an inspection, deciding who mattered and who was furniture. He was a palm oil trader in the market town of Umuoha, and he was very good at it. He had a house with a red painted gate that people used as a landmark. 3 cars, one for business, one for church, one just for looking at. A generator that roared every evening at 6 like a personal announcement to the neighborhood. And a gold chain so thick it swung when he moved, performing alongside him. He walked through that market every morning like a king inspecting his territory. Traders greeted him first always. Younger men stepped aside. Everyone used his titles. Chief, Ogadinma. He absorbed every one of them with the ease of a man who had long stopped questioning what he deserved. But behind that red gate, there was a different man entirely. A man with a temper that arrived without warning, like a storm that skips the clouds and goes straight to thunder. A voice inside his own walls that was not the warm boom the market knew. Flat, cold, the kind that had already decided what was going to happen before the words came out. Festus, the gateman, had worked at that compound for 9 years. He had survived by being invisible and useful, and had developed the ability to find urgent business at the far end of the compound the moment the atmosphere shifted. He swept that far corner so often it was the cleanest ground in all of Umuoha. Inside that house, Chief Ez Okafor did not perform. He simply ruled. And ruling meant fear. The most disturbing part of this story is not Ez. Men like Ez are not rare. What was rare, what was truly troubling was the village around him, because Umuoha knew. The market women had seen Obiageli's long sleeves in August heat, and said nothing. The church members had watched her flinch at a raised hand and looked at their programs. Her neighbors had heard things through the walls on certain nights, and turned up their radios. Her own family had seen the shadow on her jaw that powder had not fully covered, and her mother had held her hand and said every marriage has its difficulties, pray harder. While her father looked at the compound and the cars and said she was lucky not to destroy what she had. She walked them to the gate. She watched their car disappear. Then she went inside, sat in the kitchen and stared at the far wall for a long time, past crying, just sitting with the knowledge that everyone who was supposed to protect her had made their choice. And their choice was the gate and the cars and the gold chain, not her. Every pastor who shook his hand on Sundays, every leader who accepted his donations with a grateful smile, every market friend who laughed at his jokes and pretended, all of them made a choice. And those choices, accumulated quietly over years like sand building into a wall, had left Obiageli completely alone inside her marriage. Now, before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever known something was wrong in someone's home and stayed quiet because it was not your business? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because this story is not only about Ez, it is about everyone who stood around him. Remember that as we go on. Before she became Ez's wife, Obiageli was a whole person. She had a laugh people always described as contagious, the kind that took over her entire face until her eyes disappeared into it. She was sharp, quick with numbers, quick with a dry, precise wit that arrived so calmly people were halfway through their response before realizing they had just been gently, expertly taken apart. She kept a small notebook full of plans for a provision store, startup costs, stock lists, the location near the secondary school. Real, possible, close. She was 23 when she married Ez. By 25, the laugh had become quieter, more measured. By 28, the notebook was gone. By 30, she had stopped mentioning the store entirely, not because she stopped wanting it, because wanting things out loud had consequences in that house. It did not start with fists. It never does. It started with words. Sharp, cutting words in a low, controlled voice, somehow worse than shouting because of how deliberate it was. Words about her cooking, her cleaning, her appearance, her intelligence, her worth, delivered consistently, privately, by a man whose opinion she had been told all her life to value. They accumulated, they settled into the way she saw herself. They became the voice inside her own head. Then came the grabbing, a wrist held too tight. A shove called a reaction. The first slap, delivered with such certainty that it stunned her not just with pain, but with its confidence, the complete absence of hesitation. He said she had provoked it, and she, still trying to understand how this had happened, looked inward for the provocation. That is how it works. The first time you look for the cause in yourself, because the alternative, that he simply chose to hurt you without reason you could have prevented, is harder to accept than blame. And then it happened again, and again, the kind of beatings that sent her to the bathroom at 2 in the morning, to run cold water over swollen skin, and cry as quietly as possible so the children would not hear. She lived this way for years, some weeks every day, obediently endured, she documented. She prayed, in words that over time became less about asking for change, and more about asking for the strength to survive one more morning. And then, on a rainy night in November, after Ez came home from the market carrying a business loss like a loaded weapon, and found Obiegli standing in the kitchen, it ended. The sounds the neighbors heard through the walls that night were different from what they had heard before, not louder, worse, and then a silence that settled differently from a sleeping house. 3 days later, Obiegli was gone. Ez buried her in the most expensive casket Yumuo had ever seen. He wore a black agbada embroidered with silver thread. He hired a praise singer. He wept loudly, publicly, with a white handkerchief pressed to his face, while the whole village stood around him and offered condolences to a man every one of them knew, in the quietest corner of their hearts, was responsible for what had happened. The women in the crowd exchanged glances over his bowed head. Just glances. They had been having that conversation in silence for years. The pastor prayed. The community leaders consoled. The market traders patted his back. And 3 weeks after the burial, Ez dried his eyes, straightened his gold chain, and began asking around about available women. Because a man like Ez does not mourn, he restocks. And somewhere in a village called Oguta, 4 hours away by road, a young woman named Nneka had absolutely no idea what was driving toward her. I need you to do something before we continue. Share this story with one person right now, because what you are about to hear is not just about one woman in one village. It is about every community that chose comfort over conscience. Share it, then come right back. We are only getting started. Ez sat across from his old friend Bartholomew one evening, palm wine in hand, and laid out his requirements for wife number 2 with the organized calm of a man placing a business order. Young, not too educated, education gives them ideas. From a far village not nearby women have relatives who interfere. Quiet, obedient, someone who cooks without needing praise for it, and does not ask where he is going or when he is coming back. Are we clear? Bartholomew turned his cup slowly. Are you describing a person or a piece of furniture? He said. I am describing a wife, Ez replied, completely unbothered. Bartholomew drank his palm wine and said nothing more. Some arguments are not worth having, not because you are wrong, but because the man across from you is too settled in his wrongness to be moved by anything except a consequence he cannot avoid. Through matchmakers and a woman in his church who knew a family in Oguta, Ez found what he was looking for. Nneka Dyke, 26 years old, third daughter of a farmer with more children than money, described by everyone as gentle, quiet, and hardworking. Everything on the list. Ez people arrived in Oguta with drinks and a generous bride price and a polished description of the groom. Successful businessman, community leader, good provider. Not one word about Obiegli. Not one word about the long sleeves, the cold bathroom floors, the expensive casket. Nneka's mother held her daughter's face in both hands at the gate when the car came to take her away. She pressed a worn Bible into her hands. Be good, she said, work hard. Respect your husband, build your home. Nneka climbed into the car carrying hope like a small warm living thing. She had no idea. She was driving toward a graveyard with a red-painted gate. Nneka had barely finished unpacking when Ez called her to the parlor and stood in the center of the room with his arms folded like a supervisor who has already decided the new employee is going to disappoint him. In this house, he said, there is a way things are done. Breakfast on the table by 6. Compound swept before 7. My clothes ironed and laid out before I am awake. Children's school things prepared the night before. Business records updated every evening. Guests received with food and drink at all times, even without notice. I do not tolerate noise. I do not tolerate complaints. I do not answer questions about my personal business. Are we clear? Nneka looked at this man she had married 3 days ago. In the private interior of herself, she thought clearly and calmly. So this is who you are. Good, now I know. Yes, she said, we are clear. He nodded and walked out. The first month was an education in how to fail at everything regardless of effort. The soup too salty one week, not salty enough the next. The compound swept but not the correct method. The children's collars not stiff enough. She woke at 5:30 and disturbed him. She woke at 5 and the light bothered him. She cooked his favorite meal and he was tired of it. She changed the menu, and he demanded to know who gave her permission. The two house helps who had known Obiagely watched Nneka with eyes that held pity and guilty relief that attention had a new target. They warned her with small gestures, a tightening of the eyes when his car turned in early, a barely visible shake of the head when her tone was about to land badly. It happened at the start of the second month. Ez came home from the market, carrying a business grievance like a loaded weapon. Nneka had forgotten one shirt out of a full wardrobe she had ironed that morning, still damp on the line because she had been attending to a child with fever. He found it, he turned toward her. His hand came up, and Nneka went completely still. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of calculation. Quiet on the outside, extremely busy on the inside. His hand stayed in the air for 3 full seconds. Something in her expression stopped it. He lowered it, said nothing, walked out. Festus appeared in the kitchen doorway an hour later and spoke very quietly. "Madam, there is a way things work in this house. Do everything and say nothing. That is the method." Nneka looked at him steadily. "How long have you worked here?" 9 years, ma, and the first madam. Did she do everything and say nothing? Festus looked at the floor tiles. "Yes, ma." "And where is she now?" Festus said nothing. He did not need to. Nneka nodded slowly. She thanked him. He left. She stood alone in the kitchen, and something settled in her chest with the weight of a decision already made. Not a plan yet. Just a certainty, absolute and load-bearing. She was not going to disappear. It was a Saturday afternoon 3 months after her arrival. Ez was at a traders' meeting. The children were at their grandmother's. The house helps had the afternoon off. Festus dozed at the gate. The compound was quiet in the way that felt almost unfamiliar, like the house itself was finally exhaling. Nneka was cleaning the storeroom behind the kitchen, a forgotten space, dusty and packed with years of accumulated things. Old account books, broken appliances, sealed boxes. She was shifting a stack of ledgers when her hand touched something different, smaller, softer cover. She pulled it out, a small notebook. Brown cover, faded flower pattern, the kind sold at roadside stalls for 50 naira. The kind that looks like nothing important, chosen specifically because it looks like nothing important. She almost put it back. Then she opened the front cover. "My name is Obiagely Okafor. This is my private record. If you are reading this, I am probably gone. Please know that I was here. Please know that I tried." Nneka's legs made a decision her mind had not caught up with. She sat down on the dusty floor, back against the shelving, the notebook open in her lap. Obiagely had written in small, careful handwriting, with dates, with specific details, not the vague language of private pain, but the documented language of someone who understood that feelings can be called overreactions, but dates and details are harder to argue with. There was a Tuesday in March. He came home angry again. "I do not know what happened at the market. I have learned not to ask. He hit me twice. Once across the face, once on my back. I told the children I fell. They are getting old enough to know I am lying. I can see it in their faces." There was an entry in handwriting less steady than the others. "I lost the baby last night. The doctor said it was a fall. I did not correct him. What would I say? Who would believe me? Who would help me? I will grieve this the way I grieve everything in this house. Privately. Silently. Alone, and near the final pages, more letter than entry. I am tired in a way that sleep does not fix. I am not leaving because I have calculated many times that I have nowhere to go, and my children need their mother alive more than they need her brave. But I want someone to know who I was before this house. I had a laugh people said was contagious. I had a notebook full of plans for a provision store. I had opinions and jokes and a self. This house took it piece by piece, and called the taking good wifery. If there is a woman after me, and there will be, because men like Ez always need someone to replace what they break, I want her to know, you are not furniture, you are a person. Your silence is not virtue. It is oxygen for his fire. Fight for yourself not with his weapons but with yours. I was too tired and too alone by the time I understood this, but maybe you will not be. I was here, I tried, please know that." Nneka closed the diary. She sat in that dusty storeroom without moving for a long time. Not crying, not forming plans, just sitting with the full weight of it. A woman who had been in this same house, behind this same gate, writing in secret just to feel like she existed, just to feel real. Nneka stood up. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a full glass of cold water, and drank it slowly, every single drop, while staring out the window at the compound, and the cars and the gate, and the whole careful construction of a life built to impress people who would not cross the road for the woman inside it. Then she spoke out loud, quietly to herself and to Obiagely at the same time. "I hear you. And I am not tired." She walked to the kitchen drawer. She placed the diary at the very back behind the spare candles. She closed the drawer. Some weapons are most powerful when the enemy does not know you are holding them. If this story is already reaching somewhere inside you, stop and drop a comment right now. Tell me what you felt when Nneka sat down on that floor. I want to read every single response. Then let us continue. The Umuaha market was not simply where goods were bought and sold. It was the town's memory, its court of opinion, its newspaper and social club all running simultaneously from sunrise to sunset. Nothing happened in Umuaha that the market did not know. discuss, arrive at a verdict on, and then discuss again from a different angle before the day was over. Mama Kelechi ran the tomato stall at the center of the market. A broad, unhurried woman who had been married to a difficult man for 30 years and survived it through strategy and stubbornness. She had watched Obiedly fade across those years and said nothing. It was something she carried quietly. Sister Philomena ran the pepper stall 2 rows down, the market's most reliable information source. She remembered details, tracked patterns, and had the instincts of a journalist who had never attended journalism school. Auntie Rosaline sold fabric at the far end and had once famously thrown a full pot of cold water on a man who raised his hand at his wife in public. She had looked around at the crowd afterward with the expression of a woman waiting to see if anyone objected. Nobody had. She never apologized. She never will. On the morning after she found the diary, Nneka arrived at Mama Kelechi's stall and stood without speaking. Mama Kelechi set down her tomatoes. "What happened?" she asked. "I found his first wife's diary," Nneka said, "hidden in the storeroom behind the kitchen." The stall went quiet. Philomena, passing with a tray, stopped walking. Auntie Rosaline appeared from the direction of her fabric stall with the speed and certainty of a woman whose instincts had just activated. The 3 women looked at each other, and Mama Kelechi said quietly, "I am not going to end up like her," Nneka said. Auntie Rosaline smiled slowly, the kind of smile that builds from somewhere genuine. "Sit down, my daughter," she said. "Let us talk properly." What happened at that tomato stall over the next 2 hours was not a conversation. It was a strategy session. 3 women who had spent their entire adult lives navigating a world not built to protect them, who had accumulated between them nearly a century of practical knowledge about where power actually lives versus where it pretends to live. They gave her everything they had, and Nneka listened to every word. The campaign did not announce itself. It arrived the way Nneka herself had arrived, quietly, observantly, with a face that revealed nothing and a mind that had already decided everything. It started on a Monday. Ez had been complaining for weeks that the compound was never swept properly, so Nneka swept it with a thoroughness that bordered on artistry. Every corner, every crack between the paving stones under the cars along the gate, mopped, scrubbed, until the whole compound looked like it had been cleaned by professionals hired specifically to demonstrate what properly maintained actually looks like. Then she walked to where Ez stood with 2 trader friends near his second car, and held out the broom pleasantly. "I have swept everywhere except near your 3rd car in the garage," she said. "There are stains I cannot seem to get right no matter what method I try. Since your standards are much higher than I can seem to match, perhaps you could come and show me the correct way." His trader friends looked at the broom, then at Ez, then at each other. Ez went inside. His friends stayed longer than usual and found other things to discuss. 3 days later, Ez invited guests for dinner without telling Nneka until 40 minutes before their arrival. She cooked. She fed the guests first, then the children, then the house helps, then Festus at the gate. By the time she brought Ez's plate to the table, it was the temperature of food that had been waiting a little too long. "This food is cold," he announced. "I know," she said calmly. "I served everyone else first. You always say the household must be cared for, and guests must never feel unwelcome. So I made sure everyone was attended to before I brought yours." His guests heard every word. 2 of them looked at their plates. One looked at Ez with an expression difficult to read. Ez ate the food. The following Sunday, after guests had come and gone, and left behind a collection of large cooking pots, Nneka appeared in the kitchen doorway and asked Ez, with the politely practical tone of someone managing a real problem, if he could help wash the pots. "There were many guests tonight," she explained. "The pots are large. My hands are tired from the cooking." Festus happened to be in the corridor. Both house helps were nearby. Ez washed the pots. Every single one. Festus went to the far corner of the compound immediately afterward, and stood there for some time, alone with what he had just witnessed. By the 3rd week, news was reaching the market in the careful, enthusiastically detailed form that Yumuaha News always took. Each story arrived at Mama Kelechi's stall slightly larger than before. Philomena delivered them with the satisfaction of a reporter covering a historic event. Auntie Rosaline received each one with the deep settled pleasure of a woman watching justice arrive exactly on schedule. And through all of it, Ez could feel something shifting around him, in the temperature of rooms, in the brief glances of his trader friends before they changed subjects, in the way Festus always had urgent business at the far end of the compound. He could feel it, he could not locate it, he could not point to a war declared or a rule broken, because none of those things had happened. What was happening was quieter than any of them, and therefore far harder to defend against. Then came the evening when he came home and found that Nneka had reorganized his business files, logically, carefully, in a way that would actually make them easier to navigate, but without asking. He crossed the room toward her. His hand came up. Nneka turned around. She did not step back. She caught his wrist with both hands, calmly, firmly, the grip of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment. She looked him directly in the face. The house was completely still. She said in a voice so steady it was almost gentle, "I found Obiedly's diary. Every entry, every date, every detail, including the night she lost the baby and told the doctor she had fallen." She let that sit between them for a full moment. If you raise this hand at me, if you do to me what you did to her, every woman in this market will have read that diary word for word by morning. And at the next Traders Association meeting, every man in that room will hear it read aloud. All of it, every date, every detail, your name on every page. She released his wrist. Would you like your dinner? She asked. After that night, Ez did not raise his hand again. But Nneka was not finished. Because not being hit was not the full goal. The full goal was what Obiageli had written about in her last pages, being seen as a person. The Umuoha Traders Association annual dinner was the event of the year in their world. The town's most successful businessmen gathered in their finest agbadas, ate well, gave speeches about hard work and community, and received awards from each other, with the sincere pleasure of men who had been looking forward to being publicly celebrated all year. Ez had won 3 years running. He had given the keynote speech twice. He knew every face in that room. They all knew him, or at least the version of him that existed outside the red gate. He told Nneka to dress well, smile when spoken to, and remain quiet. Nneka prepared carefully. Auntie Rosaline had helped her choose the fabric 3 weeks earlier, a deep burgundy lace that caught light when she moved. Because Auntie Rosaline had known this evening was coming and had been determined that when it arrived, Nneka would not be invisible. The jewelry was simple but precise. The shoes clicked on every floor with the quiet authority of something that had a right to be there. Philomena saw her leaving the compound from across the street that evening. She stopped what she was doing and watched until the car turned the corner. Then she sat back down, said nothing to anyone, and smiled to herself. Some things speak for themselves. Nneka walked into that dinner and she took up space. Not loudly, not dramatically, with the settled presence of a woman who had decided, firmly and permanently, to stop making herself smaller for rooms that did not deserve it. Ez's speech was everything his speeches always were. Confident, polished, full of wisdom that sounds profound until you know the man delivering it. He talked about discipline, vision, the well-ordered home as the foundation of success. And then, with the satisfied smile of a man delivering a rehearsed line, he said, "Behind every successful man is a good woman." He looked at Nneka. The room applauded. Nneka smiled back at him. A slow smile, the kind Ez could not quite read, which should have been his first warning. She was standing before the applause finished. Wives did not speak at these dinners, not a written rule, simply not something that was done. "My husband is right," Nneka said, her voice steady and clear, reaching every corner of that room. "Behind every successful man is a good woman. I want to add something to that tonight." The room went completely still. Behind every good woman is a story that is rarely told. I found such a story in my husband's house, written by his first wife Obiageli in a small notebook she hid in the back of a storeroom. She gave this family everything she had. She is gone now. But she left her words behind, and I have read every single one of them. She paused. The silence had physical weight. I think this room tonight, all of us, men and women both, should ask ourselves what kind of homes we are actually building. Because a home is not the gate at the front or the cars in the yard or the awards on the wall. A home is what happens to the people inside it. Are we building homes where people grow, or homes where people disappear? The silence held for 3 full seconds after she finished. Then Auntie Rosaline, seated near the back in fabric chosen for exactly this moment, began to clap, slowly, deliberately, one pair of hands in a room that had not yet decided what it was going to do. Mama Kelechi joined, then Philomena, then other women, then one older trader near the center table who had known Obiageli and had looked away and had been carrying that quietly for 2 years. Then more men, then the whole room rising, applauding, not for the keynote speaker, not for the award winner, for a 26-year-old woman from Oguta, who had stood up in a room full of people who had chosen comfort over conscience and told the truth in front of all of them. Ez sat in his chair and felt, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely and completely small. If that moment just moved through you, share this video right now, before you read another word. Someone in your life needs this story. The drive home was 30 minutes of the heaviest quiet Ez had ever sat inside. Not peaceful, not comfortable. The kind of quiet that rides in a car like a third passenger. Nneka looked out her window the entire way. He kept his eyes on the road, and said nothing because for the first time in a long time he could not find words that would help him. Inside the house, he found her in the kitchen making tea with the unhurried movements of someone entirely at peace with where they are. He stood in the doorway. He looked different, emptied out, the posture not puffed, the gold chain still there but looking suddenly just like metal. "Nneka," he said. She turned. He looked at her for a long moment. "I have not been a good husband," he said. His voice had none of the registers she had learned, not the market voice, not the behind closed doors voice, something lower and more honest than either. She waited. "To you or to Obiageli," she said. He said her name and his voice cracked on it. Small, involuntary, not a performance, the actual sound of something breaking. "Both," he said. "I knew what I was doing. I told myself it was discipline, told myself it was how a home runs properly. But I knew what it was." "You knew," Nneka said quietly. "You just did not care." He flinched. "Yes, that is true." Obiageli wrote it all down, she continued. "Every day. She wrote because she needed someone to know she existed as a person. That is what you reduced her to. A woman writing in secret just to feel real." He put his face in his hands. "What do you want from me?" he asked. A husband, she said, not a landlord, not a supervisor, a husband. Say thank you when I cook. Ask how I am doing and actually listen. Tell your guests before you send them here. Pick your clothes off the floor. Remember that I am a full person with a history and a life that existed before you. And if I do these things, he asked quietly, then we build something real, she said. And if you do not? She picked up her tea. I still have the diary. And I have very good friends in the market with very long memories. She walked past him to the bedroom. He sat alone in the kitchen in the dark, in the quiet of a house that had finally told him the truth about himself. The transformation that followed was not dramatic, not a conversion, not a man who became suddenly tender and reflective overnight. It was slower and more real than that. The beatings stopped. The impossible demands softened. He began, awkwardly and with visible effort, to say thank you after meals. He informed his guests before sending them. He picked his clothes off the floor. And every Sunday, without fail, he washed the pots. Every single Sunday. Festus witnessed this weekly and had still, months later, not fully recovered from what his own eyes were showing him. Nneka arrived at Mama Kelechi's stall one morning and Mama Kelechi asked simply, "The pots?" Every Sunday, Nneka confirmed. The laughter that rolled through the market that morning was the full kind. The kind that builds from stall to stall, bounces off the corrugated rooftops, and rises into the Umuaha sky like something finally set free. When it settled, Nneka said quietly, "God bless Obiageli for writing it all down." The market went still. The warm, respectful quiet of a room honoring someone no longer in it, but whose presence remains in everything that came after. She did not survive, Mama Kelechi said softly, but she made sure the next one would. Here is what this story teaches us. Hear this clearly. Silence does not protect the innocent. Silence protects the abuser. Every neighbor who turned up their radio, every parent who said pray harder, every leader who accepted his donations and looked away, every friend who noticed and decided it was not their business, every one of them made a choice. And those choices, multiplied across years, cost Obiageli everything. A man's money is not a license to destroy the person he married. An expensive casket is not grief. A generous church donation is not good character. And a community that trades a woman's safety for a man's reputation does not deserve to call itself a community. A woman's patience is not an invitation to take everything from her. Her silence is not consent. It is most often a woman who has correctly understood that she has nowhere to go and no one who will genuinely help her, which is not silence freely chosen. It is silence created by everyone around her making the same wrong choice. Ez did not change because he wanted to. He changed because Nneka made the cost of not changing too high to afford. That is not a love story. It is a story about consequences, about a woman who refused to let a dead woman's truth be buried twice. Obiageli wrote in a small brown notebook hidden behind spare candles, writing carefully in the hope that someone would one day read it. Someone did. And the woman who read it stood up in a room full of the same people who had looked away and said out loud, "I found her words, and I will not let them be forgotten." That is the story of the man who wanted a quiet wife and met the woman who ended his pride. If this story moved you, share it with one person right now. One person who needs to hear that silence has an expiry date. One person who needs to know that a community can be wrong. One person who maybe needs to hear Obiageli's words for themselves. Like this video, leave a comment. Tell me what was the moment that got to you the most. Was it the diary, the dinner speech, the pots every Sunday? Tell me. I want to read every single one.